The jurors, it looks like we're going to leave for the day. Suddenly we get this verdict. It is 34 guilty counts on all of this. I want to bring in Andy McCarthy, who's here with me, Judge Deneen as well, and Trey Gowdy. Andy, where we go from here, obviously there will automatically be an appeal from this Trump team as quickly as possible. There's the legal issue of sentencing to come. That's going to take maybe months to get to a pretrial report on this and then to a sentencing by the judge. And he reminded the jurors he's the one who decides. But we have the reality now of a former president for the first time being convicted on 34 criminal counts, guilty on all of these counts. Whatever conflict or confusion or questions the jury had, they got that information back to them this morning. And by the end of day 2 of deliberations, we're at 34 guilty counts for the former president of the United States of America.
It's a historic trial of a former president of the United States by his partisan adversaries. Whatever you think of the results, it's inconceivable in New York that anyone else other than Donald Trump would ever been indicted in this way by Alvin Bragg, the elected progressive Democratic district attorney who campaigned on the fact that he would go after Donald Trump, that he had a history of going after Donald Trump. This is a very political exercise, and you have to say that it accomplished what it set out to accomplish. What they wanted was to have a situation where they could call Donald Trump a convicted felon in the run-up to the election. We have an elected Democrat who got that accomplished. He got a very friendly judge who ruled his way on every important thing and turned the jury instructions into a roadmap to conviction. So now I assume, with the mission having been accomplished, we'll have more procedural regularity, Shannon. As you just said, there'll be a pre-sentence investigation. There should be a sentencing scheduled, and we'll go from there. But this case will be appealed, and I hope that there'll be more fairness and equity in the appeal than there was in the trial.
And Trey, when these counts, this indictment first came in, there were a lot of people across the political and legal spectrum who said this feels like the weakest case against President Trump. Something changed along the way. How much of this had to do with the guidance from Judge Merchan, whether it was the jury instructions, whether it was the decisions on objections, whether it was the decision not to let in certain witnesses that the defense wanted to call?
All of the above. The verdict is a necessary and probable consequence of everything that happens up to that point. So that includes jury selection. It includes evidentiary rulings. I was in the courtroom or the overflow room 4 different days. Shannon, it wasn't just the result of Judge Merchan's rulings. The tone of his voice was different depending on which side was doing the objecting. So, you know, look, I said a week ago, juries usually get it right based on the information they're given. When you don't get to hear from an FEC expert, when you hear both proximity and propensity evidence against the defendant, and by that I mean he was close to 2 people who were guilty, therefore he must be guilty, and you hear salacious details with Stormy Daniels. I mean, I didn't ever think it was going to be an acquittal. Having been in the courtroom, I thought it might be a hung jury, 10-2, 11-1. But verdict is only the result of what you're given up until that point. So this is not a surprising result to me.
Okay, so Judge, I want to bring you in here. Obviously, an appeal takes time. It could be months, it could be years. Like Andy said, it may be a long time before that is resolved, however it is resolved. But what that leaves is this White House, the Biden-Harris campaign, free now to call President Trump a convicted felon. I got to say, though, over a year ago when President Trump was asked, will you drop out of this race if convicted, or not convicted, if indicted, he said, no, because I actually think it will help me in my poll numbers. They've done well in fundraising. He's done well in polling. Does this help or hurt now in the public opinion, where he's got to get independent voters, where he's got to get people who are not necessarily part of his base, now that he's got this conviction, which may or may not one day be overturned?
You know, Shannon, I don't have the answer to that question. I want to believe that Americans believe in justice, and I think that in their gut, they realize that there is something that is very wrong here. We have gone over a cliff in America. This verdict is a verdict of someone who was forced to fight a 1,000-pound gorilla with both hands tied behind his back. This was a defendant for whom crimes were created, against whom a judge was picked that out of the ordinary, not from the drum, but a judge who was handpicked for this defendant, who denied him the ability to fight the way he needed to fight, who brought in crimes that we've never heard of in New York before, where they had dead misdemeanors that they resurrected into felonies based upon non-unanimous verdicts of crimes that are federal, over which no state court or no state judge or prosecutor has jurisdiction. And in the end, with all the smoke and mirrors and 34 counts and a hooker and a guy, according to a federal judge, is a serial perjurer, we have convicted a former president of the United States of America. We've gone over a cliff. The question as to whether or not America will react to this, whether his numbers will go up or down, I don't know. But I do know what I know. And what I know is that this case is riddled with errors. It is reversible. It will not get through to the appellate division in the First Department in New York, or certainly the Court of Appeals before the next year. And people say, should it go to the Supreme Court? No, it can't go to the Supreme Court unless they exhaust all of the state court appeals. I've spent 32 years in this system, and I am totally disillusioned. You had a judge and you had a DA who literally campaigned on making sure that this president would be indicted. We've got an attorney general who did the same thing. This is a new era in America, and I think it goes against the ilk of who we are as Americans and our faith in the criminal justice system.
So if you're just joining us, 34 counts, 34 in that indictment against President Trump. Today, the jury comes back unanimously convicting him guilty on all 34 counts. They were all similar in that they had to do with falsification of business records. That was what would have been a misdemeanor. That's where the statute of limitations would have run. And there was another underlying crime, which we didn't find out about what that was going to be essentially until the closing arguments and the jury instructions from the judge yesterday. He gave them choices. Trey, we've talked about this many times. That they had choices. Will we ever know what choice the jury made with linking this to an underlying crime?
There are only two ways you'll know that, maybe possibly three. On appeal, arguably, the government could be forced to explain what that second crime was. Maybe it's in the special verdict form and we haven't seen it. It certainly wasn't read to the jury. It wasn't polled. The jury was just polled, which means each individual juror was asked, is this your verdict and still your verdict? We don't know what that secondary crime was, or a member of the jury could talk. They're not required to. They'll be told that they don't have to, but sometimes members of the jury will talk and they'll say this was that extra crime that we found.